Welcome back to today's programme, which is all about children's issues, and today we're concentrating on anxiety, eating disorders and self-esteem. So I have joining me now Dr. Nihara Krause, who we haven't seen for a while in the actual studio, but we've had you on Skype, haven't we?
It's lovely to be here.
Lovely to have you back.
Yes.
Always love your input to the topics that we have.
Thank
So we're talking about, first of all, we're talking about the eating disorders, but you did watch Sean's story as well about the anxiety. What did you think of that?
I thought it's a really great description, really, of a different way of dealing with anxiety. And first of all, anxiety is very, very common. It's the most common condition that affects both children and adults. And it can affect you in lots of different ways. So I think Sean had sort of, he needed to order things and he had a whole load of worries that troubled him. But I thought what was amazing was that he had this ability to dance his troubles and his worries away and to express himself. It was actually about finding an alternative form of expression. And I think that's kind of one of the important things, I think, when you work in the field of mental health, is find your own way to express yourself. Don't worry about what it is, just find it and do it.
And everyone has that somewhere, that they just have to discover what it is.
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so let's talk about eating disorders now, because it is quite alarming to know that more and more children are going through this problem. How does it all start?
It's quite a complex pattern, really. In terms of starting, first of all, I think we must separate out very common eating problems in childhood. So, if you're a fussy eater, if you don't like eating certain types of food, that isn't an eating disorder. So eating disorders are very specific. They fall into three categories. They're anorexia, bulimia, and binge eating disorder. Very young children do develop eating disorders, and it would seem as though usually that's connected with something unpleasant and out of control that children experience. So it might be some sort of trauma, it might be a loss, it might be being bullied, it might be having low self-esteem, but it then tends to help to almost help the child deal with that difficulty in some way. And we also mustn't separate out the very confusing messages that children get, whether that's from the media, whether that's from friends. I think some recent research has shown that over 50% of children in primary school either have been on a diet or want to be on a diet.
Really?
Yes.
Oh God, that's crazy.
So that's, that's really concerning.
Yeah. But then how would, with the younger kids, how would a parent identify whether it's fussy eating or an eating disorder? How would they know?
Well, again, I think you'd look at the developmental level of the child, and it is really quite hard because children's appetite and nutrition needs will change depending on whether they're going through a growth spurt or not, for example, or their age. But usually, if there are consistent changes in terms of what they eat, if they are changing in terms of their weight, and that weight change is a negative one, not expected at the time of their growth, if they seem to be avoiding eating with others, if they're saying very negative comments very much based upon their weight and their shape and about others, then those would be signs to look out for.
That's really good to know, actually.
Yes, and I think the really important thing to think about is that eating disorders are not about food. They're about underlying emotions. Eating disorders are about emotions. And so that's the kind of biggest clue in, parents sort of trying to observe.
It is a delicate subject to approach with children. So what would you say is the best way for a parent to address an issue with a child if they have maybe noticed something but they're not quite sure?
I would just, generally keep your communication going. So just strike up a conversation about all sorts of things, just find out how they are and really try and find out whether they might be troubled about something. So again, it's sort of getting to that emotional level. And, you might say, well, I've noticed that perhaps you're not, you've been, perhaps not always joining us for a meal. Just wondered, whether there was anything that way around. So be tentative. Don't appear to be cross, because that's the very thing that children will then avoid, talking about. Be encouraging and be prepared to hear things you don't like to hear, but be open to hearing more. So keep the communication going and then help them to start to think about perhaps alternatives. So provide them with alternatives rather than saying, no, well, that's it then. That's the very thing you're going to have.
Oh, so, right, okay.
Yes.
Not good.
No.
And when is it time to get professional help, Nihara?
Again, I think that if you see any physical changes, and with children, it's very, very important to pick that up early. If you start to notice any physical changes, if your child has started to withdraw a bit from their friendship groups, if you have any concerns anyway, it's never a problem to go and get some advice, really. And you might want to go on your own, go and see your GP on your own if you want to, or another health professional, but just find out, and also ask other parents and just see whether their children are doing the same or different. You can sort of get a bit of a feel about it.
Okay. And in terms of treatment available for children?
Well, there's lots of treatment, but I think with parents, I think it's also important to really think about prevention, first and foremost. So there's lots of things you can do on the eating front. First of all, don't have good and bad categories of food. So, try and have everything there. Encourage children to eat. Make sure you keep sort of family routines. Have breakfast together if you can, even though it's busy time. Have meals together. Try to make meal times pleasant rather than the only time that the family has a row, for example. Watch your own eating patterns. It's very common for eating disorders to run in families, and if you are a picky eater or a choosy eater, or if you avoid food, then you need to face up to that, because children will be open to that.
Again, that's so interesting. It's like the self-esteem issues we were talking earlier. The parents just lead by example, don't they?
Well, absolutely. You are the role model, and that'd be really important, and it's by what you do. Far more than what you say sometimes. So, just have a think about that. Also treat your child, get to know your child as a whole. So give them messages about themselves as people rather than based on the way they look, for example. Be careful of not always commenting on other people's weight or shape, and give them the opportunity to express themselves in a variety of different ways, as we saw from that film. Just think about how you might, give them tools to communicate things if they're troubled by
I'm learning a lot on today's show. It's really been handy. I'm sure the parents out there are just lapping all this up, because this is very useful. Right, so we've got just a couple of minutes left, Nihara, but if like maybe the prevention hasn't worked.
And treatment available. There's lots of different treatment. Go and see your GP first, because they will be able to give your child a health check, make sure that they're well health-wise, because psychological treatment will only work at best when your child's health is well. If they are very, very unhealthy, the health is suffering, then they need to be able to be boosted in that way. The help is a combination of nutritional help, so they do need to learn to eat well, alongside psychological help. And there's plenty of very, very good treatment techniques available. And I can't stress enough, as I always say on this show, get help early, because you can make enormous change if you can do things soon.
Hi, I'm Chrissy B, and my show is all about improving your mental health and being happy. Join me every Monday, Wednesday and Friday at 10 p.m. on my channel Sky 203. Visit chrissybshow.tv for more information, and subscribe to our YouTube channel, Chrissy B Show. You can also follow us on Twitter and Instagram at Chrissy B Show, and on our Facebook page, The Chrissy B Show.